I arrived at Yellowstone's South Caldera Station on a Wednesday in late November, 3 days after the last tourist bus rolled out of the park. The transfer paperwork called it a winter maintenance assignment. Skeleton crew, essential patrols only, reduced operations until spring thaw. What they didn't mention was how the silence would feel like a physical presence, or how the ground would hum beneath your boots even when standing still. Ranger Hale met me at the trailhead with a government-issue Chevy that had seen better decades. He was maybe 60, lean in that wiry way that speaks to decades of hard work, with burn scars creeping up the left side of his neck like pale vines. His handshake was brief and cold despite the thermal gloves. "Caleb Morris?" he asked, though he already knew. "Yes, sir." "Reporting for winter rotation." He nodded once, loaded my duffel into the bed without comment, and we drove in silence through corridors of lodgepole pine heavy with early snow. The roads here don't follow normal logic. They curve around thermal features, avoid certain meadows entirely, double back on themselves for no apparent reason. I noticed Hale never looked directly at the forest, only through it, as if watching for something just beyond the tree line. The South Caldera cabin sat at the edge of a geyser basin I couldn't find on any of my orientation maps. Steam rose from dozens of vents, twisting into shapes that lingered too long before dissipating. The ground was a patchwork of snow and exposed earth that radiated heat in irregular pulses. Standing there you could feel Yellowstone breathing. "Coffee's in the thermos on the counter," Hale said as he unlocked the cabin door. "Generator runs until 10. After that, you're on battery backup. Radio check is every 4 hours during patrol, every 8 if you're stationary. Standard procedure." I'd done winter postings before, 3 seasons in Rocky Mountain, 2 in the San Juans. Isolation didn't bother me. After Denver, after the apartment I couldn't afford and the woman who'd moved on faster than I could pack, isolation was exactly what I needed. Hale set a laminated card on the small wooden table. "Winter Patrol Protocols, South Caldera Zone," it read across the top in faded typewriter font. I scanned the usual entries: check thermal monitors, report unusual seismic activity, maintain trail markers, document wildlife behavior. Then I reached the addendums. Never respond to voices near the thermal vents after dark. If you see a bison herd standing still, turn around and take another route. Between 2:10 and 2:30 a.m., remain inside the patrol cabin. Lock every window. Do not look outside. If your radio picks up channel 19, turn it off immediately. If you see someone wearing a park uniform without a name tag, do not engage. I looked up at Hale, half smiling. Folklore protocols? Part of the orientation hazing? His expression didn't change. "You'll believe them by the first thaw. Come on. Voices at thermal vents? Standing bison? The protocols exist because they work." He picked up his keys, headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "Rule 6 isn't written down, but it should be. If something calls you by name out here and you didn't see its mouth move, don't answer. Don't even acknowledge you heard it." The door closed behind him before I could respond. His truck rumbled away down the snow-packed road, and then there was only the hiss of steam and the distant groan of the earth settling. I spent the afternoon unpacking and familiarizing myself with the cabin's layout. One room, basically, cot, table, wood stove, radio station, a wall of reference materials about geothermal activity and wildlife patterns. The windows were small, double-paned, with heavy shutters that locked from the inside. Excessive for a maintenance station, I thought. The kind of thing you'd expect in bear country maybe, but grizzlies were denayed up by now. The logbook sat on the corner of the table, its cover worn soft with handling. I flipped through the recent entries. Routine observations mostly. Geyser Basin Sea normal activity. Elk migration observed heading northeast. Radio check completed. Standard ranger documentation. But tucked between October and November was a loose page, the handwriting different, older, more cramped. "When the earth breathes, don't answer back." They listened through the cracks. No date. No signature. Just that single line on yellowed paper. I filed it mentally under weird but harmless, and started my first patrol as the sun dropped behind the western ridgeline. The trails around the South Caldera zone weren't maintained for tourists. These were monitoring routes, narrow paths winding between thermal features that could boil you alive if you stepped wrong. I followed the markers carefully, checking each tagged vent against the thermal map, noting temperatures and steam pressure in my field notebook. Everything was routine until I reached Mudpot Cluster 7. The evening had gone fully dark, that particular winter darkness that feels absolute. My headlamp cut a small tunnel through the black, illuminating the churning gray mud and billowing steam. I was transcribing temperature readings when I heard it. Caleb. My name. Clear as a bell. A man's voice, low and familiar in a way I couldn't place. I turned, sweeping my light across the mud pot. Steam rose from the roiling surface, thick and white. For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, the steam twisted into a shape. Not random. Not natural. A face, rough-featured and hollow-eyed, staring directly at me. Then it dissolved, and there was only the hiss of superheated water and the pounding of my heart. I stood there for a full minute, waiting for movement, for an explanation. Some hiker who'd wandered off-trail, maybe. Some acoustic trick of the thermal vents. But the forest around me was silent except for the ever-present whisper of steam. Rule 1 drifted back through my mind. Never respond to voices near the thermal vents after dark. I marked my log notation, clicked off my recorder, and walked back to the cabin at a pace that wasn't quite running but wasn't quite walking either. That night, I locked every window, something I told myself was just good protocol, and lay on the cot staring at the ceiling. The cabin was warm from the wood stove, but I couldn't shake the chill that had settled in my chest. Outside, the geysers continued their rhythmic eruptions. Old Faithful was miles away, but here in the basin, smaller vents fired on their own timelines. Except tonight they seemed synchronized. Every 45 seconds, a collective hiss. Like breathing. I checked my watch. 1:47 a.m. 23 minutes until 2:10. I don't know why I counted down. Why I felt the need to be awake, alert, when that window of time arrived. But when the minute hand clicked to 2:10, I was sitting upright on the cot, fully dressed, watching the door. For exactly 20 minutes the world outside went wrong. The hissing stopped first, completely, as if every vent had been capped simultaneously. Then came the hum. Deep, subsonic, felt more than heard. It resonated through the floorboards, through the frame of the cot, through my sternum. The windows rattled softly in their frames. Something moved past the cabin. I didn't see it. I'd obeyed the rule, kept my eyes away from the glass, but I heard it. Footsteps that were too heavy, too slow, accompanied by a wet dragging sound. At 2:29 the hum stopped. At 2:30 the geysers resumed their rhythm. I sat there until dawn, the laminated card clutched in my hand, reading and rereading rules I'd thought were jokes. When Hale arrived for the morning briefing, he took one look at my face and nodded slowly. "First night's always the hardest," he said, pouring coffee from his thermos. "After that you'll know what to expect." "What was that?" I asked. "Between 2:10 and 2:30? Hale stirred his coffee, staring into the dark liquid. "The park checking on you. Making sure you're where you're supposed to be. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He set down his mug and met my eyes. "You followed the rules. That's what matters. Keep following them and you'll make it to spring." He left before I could press further. I spent the rest of that day trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation. Seismic activity causing auditory hallucinations. Infrasound from the thermal features. Stress and isolation playing tricks on my perception. But that night, when I heard my name whispered from the direction of the mud pots, I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. By my third night, I'd established a routine that felt almost normal. Morning patrol at first light, documentation and maintenance during the day, evening patrol at dusk, then back to the cabin well before 2:10 a.m. The rules had become a framework I operated within, like checking ice thickness before crossing a frozen lake. You didn't question it, you just did it. The park's silence had stopped feeling oppressive and started feeling watchful instead, which was somehow worse. The lodgepole pines leaned at angles that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The thermal features burbled and hissed with rhythms that were almost conversational if you listened too long. I stopped listening. My logbook entries became shorter, more clipped. I caught myself writing in fragments. Basin temps normal. Wildlife scarce. Radio check 0600. Where I'd usually add context and observation, now I just recorded facts. It was easier that way. Less room for the creeping feeling that I was documenting something that was documenting me back. The radio was my only real connection to the outside world. Hale checked in twice daily, his voice crackling through static that seemed worse than it should be given the equipment. Other rangers occasionally crossed through the airwaves, distant voices discussing trail conditions, wildlife sightings, supply requests. Normal Park Service chatter that felt increasingly surreal against the backdrop of the South Caldera zone. On the third night, during my evening patrol, the static changed. I was checking thermal monitors near the northern ridge when my radio crackled to life mid-frequency. Not the clean click of someone keying a mic, but a slow, wavering static that rose and fell like breathing. Then I heard her voice. "Caleb?" Caleb, please. Jessica. My ex-girlfriend. The woman I'd left behind in Denver along with everything else I couldn't afford to keep. I'm lost. Caleb, I'm so lost. Where are you? My hand went to the radio automatically, fingers hovering over the talk button. The voice was perfect. Her slight Colorado accent, the way she always said my name with a question mark at the end even when it wasn't a question. Please, I need help. I can't find my way back. I looked at the radio display. Channel 19. The rule came back like a slap. If your radio picks up Channel 19, turn it off immediately. But it was her voice. She sounded terrified, alone. What if she'd somehow tracked me here? What if she was actually lost in the park, wandering in the dark near thermal features that could kill her? Caleb, please answer. I'm so cold. The static pulsed, and underneath it I heard something else. A wet, rhythmic sound like something breathing through water. I switched channels. The voice followed. Why won't you answer me? Don't you care? Channel 7. She followed. Channel 12. Still there. Caleb, I'm scared. There's something out here with me. My finger was on the power button. Every rational part of my mind was screaming to turn it off, but the primal part, the part that remembered holding her, hearing her laugh, failing her when she needed stability I couldn't provide, that part was louder. Help me, please. I turned off the radio. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. The thermal vent beside me hissed, and the steam curled upward into the beam of my headlamp. For just a moment, I could swear the steam formed her face, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Then it dispersed, and there was only the endless Yellowstone night. I stood there for a long time, the dead radio heavy in my hand, trying to remember what Jessica's real voice sounded like. Trying to convince myself that what I'd heard was just an impossibly good imitation, some phenomenon of the park that I didn't understand yet. I couldn't. Back at the cabin, I went through the old logs with new purpose. The filing cabinet in the corner held decades of documentation, loosely organized by year. Most of it was mundane: patrol reports, maintenance records, incident documentation of tourists doing stupid things. But scattered throughout, always on loose pages or written in margins, were the other entries. The warnings. Voices mimic people you love. They're not lost. They're listening. No date, no signature. The radio isn't broken. Channel 19 was never ours to use. Dated March 1991, Ranger P. Chin. Don't answer. Don't acknowledge. Don't believe. Dated January 1987, illegible signature. The most recent entry that mentioned Channel 19 was from 2 winters ago, written by someone named Ranger Delacroix. Heard my daughter on 19 tonight. She's been dead for 3 years. The voice knew things only she would know. Knew the pet name I called her. Knew the song I sang when she couldn't sleep. But when I asked what her favorite color was, it said red. Her favorite color was purple. She always said red was the color of bad things. Whatever uses Channel 19 gets close, but it makes mistakes. Look for the mistakes. That's how you know it's not real. I sat back, the page trembling slightly in my hands. Jessica's voice hadn't made any mistakes. It had been perfect. Down to the slight catch in her throat when she was scared, the way she drew out the please when she was desperate. Either it had gotten better at mimicking or it had been real and I turned off the radio on someone who actually needed help. The thought made my stomach turn. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the table, the radio in front of me powered off, while I wrote notes I'd probably never show anyone. If the voices are listening, what are they listening for? What answer would satisfy them? Or is the point that there is no right answer, that engagement itself is the trap? At 2:10 a.m., I locked the windows and sat on the cot with my back to the wall. The hum came as expected, that deep resonance that made your teeth ache and your vision blur slightly. This time I could swear I heard other sounds underneath it. Footsteps, yes, but also something that might have been breathing, and something that might have been words in a language that predated language. At 2:30 it stopped and the geysers resumed. When dawn finally came, I stepped outside to find the snow around the cabin marked with prints I didn't recognize. Not animal. Not quite human. Long and narrow with what looked like too many toes, arranged in a pattern that suggested something walking upright but not in any gait that made anatomical sense. The tracks circled the cabin 3 times, then led away toward the nearest thermal vent and disappeared into the steam. Hale arrived at 0800 for the morning briefing. He saw the tracks immediately but said nothing, just followed them with his eyes and took a long drink of his coffee. Channel 19? He finally asked, not looking at me. How did you? You're still here, so you turned it off. That's what matters. He set down his thermos and pulled out a cigarette, lit it despite the no smoking policy, and exhaled slowly. What did you hear? My ex-girlfriend. Jessica. She sounded lost. Scared. She in Denver? Last I knew. He nodded. Then she wasn't out here. Whatever you heard, it wasn't her. It sounded exactly like her. It always does. He took another drag. The park records everything. Every word spoken near the thermal features, every sound, every voice. The heat and pressure and minerals down there, it's like a massive storage medium. And something down in the caldera can play it back. Mix and match. Create composites. It'll use your mother's voice, your best friend's voice, your own voice from years ago. Whatever it takes to get you to respond. Why? Hale was quiet for a long moment, watching the steam rise from the distant vents. Best guess? Because engaging means you're participating. And once you participate, you're part of the system. Part of what this place is. That's not a scientific explanation. No, he agreed. It's not. He ground out his cigarette and picked up his thermos. I'm driving out to the main station for supplies. Be back tomorrow morning. You'll be alone tonight. Follow the rules, Caleb. All of them. Don't try to make sense of them, don't try to logic your way around them. Just follow them. After he left, I spent the day on routine patrols, methodically checking each thermal feature and documenting readings that all fell within normal ranges. Normal, as if anything about this place could be called normal. That night, the geyser basin seemed louder than usual. Not just the hissing of steam but other sounds layered underneath, grinding, groaning like massive gears turning deep in the earth. I thought about geological explanations, tectonic pressure, magma chamber movement, thermal expansion and contraction. I thought about them but I didn't believe them. At 2:09 a.m., I locked the last window and sat down at the table facing away from the glass. My radio sat there still powered off. I'd left it off since the previous night, hadn't turned it back on even for the scheduled checks. At 2:10 the hum began. And this time something knocked on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Pause. 3 more. I stared at the door at the deadbolt I'd checked twice and waited. The knocking continued, patient and rhythmic, for the full 20 minutes. At 2:30 it stopped. But before the geysers resumed, I heard one more thing through the door. A voice not quite human, not quite anything else, speaking in a tone that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. We know you're listening, Caleb. We know you're there. Then silence. Then steam and heat, and the endless breathing of the park. Ranger Thomas arrived on a Thursday morning, hauled in by Hale in a park service truck that looked even more battered than the one I'd arrived in. He was maybe 35, broad-shouldered and loud in the way that people from actual Montana wilderness were loud, confident, practiced, the kind of man who'd grown up hunting elk and breaking ice on cattle troughs. He had good boots and a thick beard, and when he shook my hand his grip was meant to establish something. Heard we had a Colorado transplant, he said, grinning. Hale says you're settling in all right. Getting there, I replied, which was true in the sense that I was still alive and hadn't fled screaming into the woods. Thomas dumped his gear in the corner of the cabin and immediately started talking. About his last posting in Glacier, about a grisly encounter he'd had 2 summers back, about his girlfriend who taught school in Bozeman and made the best huckleberry pie in 3 counties. Normal things. Human things. I realized how much I'd missed normal human conversation. Hale handed him the laminated protocol card during the briefing. Thomas read through it, his smile fading into something like bemused skepticism. When he finished, he looked up at Hale with raised eyebrows. Ghost stories? Seriously? Hale's expression didn't change. Protocols exist for reasons. Come on, man. Don't respond to voices? Lock your windows between 2:10 and 2:30 foot? This is the kind of stuff you tell kids at summer camp to keep them in their tents. Follow them anyway, Hale said flatly. Thomas looked at me expecting support or camaraderie. I thought about the voice on Channel 19, about the footprints in the snow, about the patient knocking at 2:15 a.m. I thought about warning him properly, but what would I say? That the park was alive? That the rules weren't metaphors? Instead I said, they're easier to follow than to question. He laughed, but it had an edge. Right. Sure. Hale left us to run joint patrols while he handled administrative work back at the main station. Buddy system, he said before driving off. Don't split up. Don't deviate from the marked trails. Report anything unusual. Thomas and I set out that afternoon to check the eastern thermal basins. He talked the whole way, cheerfully skeptical about everything from the protocol card to the cabin's excessive window locks to the fact that nobody seemed to patrol the South Caldera zone during tourist season. Because it's dangerous, I explained. Unstable ground. Boiling water. Easy to fall through the crust. Then why patrol it at all? Because someone has to monitor it. Or, Thomas said, grinning, because the Park Service loves bureaucracy and this is a make-work position to justify funding. He wasn't entirely wrong about the bureaucracy, but he was missing the point so completely it made my chest tight. We were 2 hours into the patrol when we reached Meadow Basin 7, a wide clearing between stands of lodgepole pine where thermal vents dotted the landscape like pockmarks. The snow here was thin, melted by underground heat, and the ground steamed in patches. That's where we found the bison. There were at least 50 of them, maybe more, standing in the clearing in a formation that was almost geometric. Not grazing, not moving, not even shifting their weight. Just standing, heads all facing west toward the tree line, their breath forming identical plumes of steam in the frozen air. The temperature dropped as we approached. Not gradually, instantly, like stepping into a freezer. My breath caught and I felt the cold sink through my jacket and settle in my bones. Thomas started to laugh. Well, that's eerie as hell. What are they, sleeping standing up? We need to leave, I said immediately. Turn around. Rule 2. He ignored me, taking a step closer to the herd. They're just animals, man. Bison do weird things. They're probably conserving energy or something. Thomas, the rule says. The rule is superstitious bullshit. He was still smiling, but there was something challenging in it now. You really buy this stuff? Voices in the steam? Magic bison? The ground beneath us hummed, that same subsonic frequency I'd felt during the 2:10 a.m. window. The snow crust around the herd cracked with sounds like distant gunfire. Thomas, please. Just turn around with me. We can take another route. I'm not going to, he stopped mid-sentence. Every single bison had turned its head to look at him. Not shifted position, not pivoted their bodies. Just rotated their heads in perfect unison, a synchronized movement that was absolutely wrong. Their eyes were pale white like cataracts or fog and they reflected no light. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees in an instant. Okay, Thomas said quietly, his voice suddenly very small. Okay, that's not normal. Back away slowly, I whispered. Don't run. Don't make sudden movements. He took a step backward. The bison took a step forward, still in perfect synchronization, their hooves hitting the ground in a single collective thud. Thomas, we need to go. Now. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, no sound except the hum beneath the ground that was growing louder, more insistent. Thomas turned and ran. I bolted after him, shouting his name, but he was faster and panicked and not listening. The sound of hooves followed us, not running but walking, that same measured pace, getting closer with each synchronized step. I risked a glance backward and immediately wished I hadn't. The bison were following, but they weren't running either. They were gliding across the snow, their legs moving but their hooves not quite touching the ground, leaving no tracks, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Thomas, don't stop. Keep. He'd stopped. He was standing at the edge of a patch of thin ice, the kind that formed over thermal vents where the water underneath stayed liquid even in winter. He was breathing hard, staring at something I couldn't see, and he was smiling in a way that made my blood freeze. It's fine, he said, not to me but to the air. They're just animals. It's fine. They're not. Thomas, move. But he didn't move. He stood there, that strange smile fixed on his face, while the bison herd closed the distance. When they were maybe 10 feet away they stopped. Still synchronized. Still staring with those white empty eyes. Then Thomas took a step forward onto the thin ice. It didn't crack. He took another step. Then another. Walking out onto ice that should have broken under his weight, walking toward a thermal vent that steamed and bubbled 20 feet away. I ran toward him, grabbed his shoulder, tried to pull him back. His skin was cold through his jacket, far colder than the air temperature could account for. Thomas, stop. You're going toward. He turned to look at me and his eyes were the same pale white as the bison. It's fine, he said again in a voice that had harmonics underneath it, like multiple people speaking at once. They just want to show me something. They just want me to see. I let go and stumbled backward, my heart hammering. Thomas turned away and kept walking out across the impossible ice, toward the steaming vent. The bison followed, gliding silent across the snow. The ice never cracked. Thomas never fell. He just walked and they followed, and then the steam from the vent rose up around them like a curtain and they were gone. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, maybe an hour, staring at the patch of thin ice that showed no cracks, no breaks, no sign that anyone had crossed it. The only evidence was a set of boot prints leading to the edge, then nothing. Eventually my radio crackled. South Caldera Patrol, this is base. Check in. Hale's voice. Calm, tired, expecting. I keyed the mic with shaking hands. This is Morris. Oh, we had an incident. Ranger Thomas is gone. There was a long pause. Then, Meadow Basin 7? How did you know? Come back to the cabin, Caleb. We'll talk when you get here. The walk back took 3 hours. I kept expecting to hear Thomas's voice behind me, kept expecting to see him stumble out of the tree line with some rational explanation. But the forest was silent and I was alone, and the sun was setting by the time the cabin came into view. Hale was waiting outside, smoking another cigarette despite the cold. He broke rule 2, Hale said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Hale walked into the cabin without another word. I followed and watched as he went to a corkboard mounted near the door, a board I'd noticed but never really examined. It was covered with index cards, each one bearing a name and a date. He pulled a blank card from his pocket, wrote Thomas November 27th, in precise block letters and pinned it to the board. There were at least 30 other names there. Some of the cards were yellowed with age, the ink faded to brown. The oldest I could see was dated 1979. What happens to them? I asked. Where do they go? Hale lit another cigarette. I don't know. Search and rescue never finds bodies. No remains, no equipment, nothing. They just stop existing from our perspective. He exhaled slowly. My theory? The park takes them, absorbs them, makes them part of itself. But that's just a theory. Can we look for him? Can we? No. His voice was firm but not unkind. Whatever took Thomas isn't interested in giving him back. And going after him means breaking more rules. Means exposing yourself to the same thing that took him. The best thing you can do is file the report, document what you saw and move on. That's it? We just accept it? Hale met my eyes. What choice do we have? That night I wrote the incident report in clinical, detached language. Ranger Thomas failed to follow established protocol regarding stationary bison herds. Subject became disoriented and left the patrol route. Location unknown. Search efforts not recommended due to unstable thermal activity and unsafe ground conditions. It was all true. It was also completely inadequate. I didn't sleep. I sat at the table with the radio on, tuned to channel 4, carefully avoiding 19, and listened to the geysers and the hum of the earth and the small sounds that might have been thermal expansion or might have been something else. At 2:10 a.m. I locked the windows and waited. The knock came at 2:15. 3 slow raps, patient and deliberate. Then Thomas's voice muffled through the door. Caleb? Caleb, let me in. I'm back. It's okay now. They let me go. I stared at the door at the deadbolt and said nothing. Please man, I'm freezing out here. I don't know what happened. Please open the door. At 2:30 the knocking stopped. But I could have sworn I heard more than one voice out there in the dark, all speaking in perfect unison, all calling my name. After Thomas disappeared, sleep became theoretical. I'd lie on the cot for hours, watching the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin settling, waiting for the knock that came every night at 2:15. Sometimes it was Thomas's voice. Sometimes it was Jessica's. Once it was my mother's, though she'd been dead for 6 years. The protocol card sat on the table, edges worn from my constant handling. I'd memorized every word, but I kept reading it anyway like a prayer or a spell. The rules weren't protection exactly, more like a negotiated truce with something that had been here long before the National Park Service, long before the United States, long before anyone had thought to name this place Yellowstone. Hale had gone back to the main station for an extended administrative period, which I suspected meant dealing with Thomas's disappearance paperwork. He checked in by radio twice a day, asked if I was following protocols, never asked how I was holding up. It was better that way. Sympathy would have made it harder. 3 days after losing Thomas, I started going through the filing cabinet in earnest. The cabinet was older than me, olive-drab military surplus with a lock that had long since rusted open. Inside were decades of documents. Patrol logs, incident reports, equipment manifests, weather data. The usual detritus of bureaucratic operation. But interspersed throughout, like archaeological layers revealing successive civilizations, were the other records. The real records. I started with the earliest files I could find, dated 1979, the year Hale had mentioned. The initial entries were mundane, establishing patrol routes, documenting thermal features, baseline wildlife surveys. Standard Park Service work. Then, in March of 1979, Ranger David Brandt wrote, "Something is wrong with the geyser intervals. Old Faithful is fine, but the South Caldera vents are erupting in sequence like a pattern. Jenkins says it's coincidence, but I've been timing them. 45 seconds between eruptions exactly for the past 3 days. Natural processes don't work like clockwork. A week later, a different hand, Ranger Claire Jenkins presumably. Brand is missing. He went out for evening patrol 4 days ago and didn't come back. His truck is still here. His coat is still here. The only tracks lead to Mudpot Cluster 12 and then stop. Like he just evaporated. Search and rescue found nothing. Absolutely nothing. The next entry was dated May 1979. The rules are being compiled based on survivor testimony and pattern analysis. If you're reading this, follow them. Don't try to understand them. Don't look for exceptions. Just follow them. Then a gap. Nothing for 2 months. When the log resumed, it was just routine observations with a careful, clipped tone. The kind of writing you do when you're trying very hard not to think about what you're documenting. I pulled files from other years. The pattern repeated. 1983, Ranger Michael Chu disappeared near Meadow Basin 7 after approaching a stationary bison herd. He kept saying they were just animals. He kept saying it even as he walked out onto the frozen vent. 1987, Ranger Patricia DeLeon heard her daughter on Channel 19. Against protocol, she responded. They found her radio 3 days later, still transmitting. Just static and breathing. They never found Patricia. 1991, Ranger James Worth broke the 2:10 a.m. rule. Thought the knocking was a wounded animal. Opened the door to check. The only thing they recovered was his boot, placed neatly on the doorstep, laces tied. Still warm. The files were consistent in their inconsistency, different rangers, different years, different violations, but the same outcome. Disappearance. No bodies. No resolution. Just a name added to the corkboard and operations continuing as if this were normal, acceptable, the cost of doing business in the South Caldera Zone. I found the most recent entries buried near the back of the drawer. Ranger Julia Delacroix, whose note about Channel 19 I'd read earlier, had kept extensive documentation during her winter posting 3 years ago. Her early entries were clinical, almost academic. The thermal features in the South Caldera Zone demonstrate anomalous behavior that defies standard geothermal models. The ground temperature varies by up to 40 degrees within a 5-foot radius, with no apparent correlation to vent location or depth. The hum that occurs between 2:10 and 2:30 a.m. registers on seismographs but shows a waveform pattern that's almost perfectly sinusoidal, not consistent with natural seismic activity. Later entries became more personal. I heard my daughter again tonight. Not on the radio this time, just out in the dark calling for me. She died in 2016. Car accident. Quick, they said, painless. But here she sounds scared and lost, and I want so badly to answer her. The protocol says don't respond. Don't acknowledge. I understand why now. Because if I answer, if I engage, then I'm admitting that the impossible is real. And once you admit that, where does it stop? Her final entry, dated February of that year. I understand now what this place is. It's not haunted. It's not cursed. It's alive. The caldera isn't just a geological feature. It's an organism or part of one, or something we don't have words for. The heat, the pressure, the minerals, it's all neural tissue in a sense. Storage and processing. The park records everything that happens here, every word, every sound, every death. And something down in the magma chamber can access those recordings. Can use them. Can reach up through the cracks and touch the surface. The rules aren't superstition. They're a survival manual for living on the skin of something vast and incomprehensible. Something that's been here since the Earth cooled, since the first supervolcano eruption, since before humans existed. We're just visitors. Temporary. And if we're very, very careful, it might let us leave. After that, nothing. Delacroix had finished her posting and transferred out. Hale never mentioned her, and there was no indication of what happened after she left. I hoped she'd made it out, made it somewhere far from here where the ground didn't breathe and the steam didn't whisper. But I didn't really believe it. I spent the next week creating my own documentation. Measurements, observations, patterns I was starting to recognize. The geyser eruptions were definitely synchronized during certain periods. The temperature anomalies followed a pattern that might be circadian or might be something else. The radio static on Channel 19 was strongest between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., with a peak at 2:20. I was building a model in my head, trying to understand the system, trying to find edges and boundaries. If this thing, the park, the organism, whatever it was, operated according to rules, then those rules could be mapped. And if they could be mapped, maybe they could be managed. It was a comforting thought. The illusion of control. On the 8th night after Thomas's disappearance, I was transcribing temperature data by lamplight when I heard the hooves. Not the synchronized thud of the possessed bison herd, but a lighter, singular sound. One animal walking slowly around the perimeter of the cabin. I froze, pen hovering over the notebook, and listened. The hoofbeats circled once. Twice. On the third circuit they stopped directly outside the door. I checked my watch. 9:47 p.m. Not the prohibited window. Not protected time. Slowly, quietly, I moved to the window and lifted the edge of the curtain just enough to see out. A single bison stood in the clearing, maybe 15 feet from the cabin. Its eyes glowed red in the lamplight, not reflected light but actual luminescence like embers. Steam rose from its nostrils in rhythmic pulses. It was staring directly at the window, directly at me. We stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes, locked in mutual observation. I could see its chest rising and falling with breaths that seemed too slow, too deliberate. Could see the way the snow around its hooves had melted, forming a perfect circle of bare earth. Then it turned and walked away, not toward the forest but toward the nearest thermal vent. It didn't hesitate at the edge, didn't slow. It just kept walking until the steam swallowed it, and then it was gone. I marked the observation in my log. 2,147 hours. Solitary bison. Atypical behavior. Approached cabin, departed via thermal vent 7. Eyes exhibited bioluminescence or reflective anomaly. Clinical. Detached. As if I were studying bird migration patterns. That night, for the first time, the knock at 2:15 didn't come. The 20-minute window passed in complete silence. No hum, no footsteps, no voices. Just the normal night sounds of the park. Wind in the pines, distant coyotes, the occasional crack of thermal expansion. Felt like a test. Or a warning. Or maybe an acknowledgement. The bison had looked at me and I had looked back, and something had been communicated in that exchange. Some understanding reached. I was being watched. Evaluated. My adherence to the protocols was noted. And as long as I kept following the rules, I might be allowed to stay. When morning came, I found a message tacked to the outside of the door. A page torn from an old patrol log, the handwriting unfamiliar. When the earth breathes, don't answer back. They listen through the cracks. The same phrase I'd found weeks ago on a loose page in the logbook. Except this time, there was something added at the bottom in fresh ink. You're doing well. Keep going. It's Hale's handwriting. But Hale was at the main station 40 miles away. His truck hadn't been here. I'd heard nothing during the night except the hoofbeats and the silence. I took the note inside and filed it with the others, adding it to the archaeological record of people who'd survived this place by learning its language. The rules weren't protection. They were vocabulary. And I was becoming fluent. Hale returned on a gray morning 2 weeks after Thomas disappeared, his truck grinding up the snow-packed road just after dawn. I'd been awake for hours. Sleep had become something I did in fragmented intervals, always listening, always half expecting the knock even during daylight hours. He looked older than I remembered. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and he moved with the careful stiffness of someone whose body hurt in places that didn't show. He set his thermos on the table without preamble and poured coffee for both of us, the steam rising between us like a curtain. "You're still here?" he said. Not a question. Where else would I go? He almost smiled at that. Most people find a reason. Emergency family situation. Medical leave. Transfer request. Anything to get out before winter solstice. Why solstice? Because that's when it's strongest. Longest night, deepest cold. The boundary gets thin. Things that usually just watch start to reach. He sipped his coffee, grimacing. "But you're not planning to leave, are you?" "I don't know yet." "That's honest." He pulled out a cigarette, then seemed to think better of it and tucked it back into the pack. "You've been reading the old logs?" "Yes." "And you have questions?" "About 1,000 of them." Hale stared out the window at the steaming geyser fields, his scarred neck catching the pale morning light. "Ask. What happened here? Not just generally, specifically. What is this place? What's down there?" He was quiet for a long time, organizing thoughts or maybe deciding how much truth I could handle. Finally, "You know what a caldera is, geologically speaking?" "Collapsed volcanic crater. After the magma chamber empties." "Right. Yellowstone's caldera is massive, 30 by 45 miles. The magma chamber underneath is even bigger. It's not empty, of course. That's what feeds all the thermal features, the geysers, the hot springs. Standard geology." He paused. "But the South Caldera zone sits right on top of something else. A secondary chamber, deeper and older." Not on any official geological survey because it doesn't behave like it should. The seismic readings are wrong. The heat signature is wrong. And the magnetic field. He trailed off. What about it? It shifts. Daily cycles, lunar cycles, patterns that look almost deliberate. Like something down there is breathing, thinking, responding to what happens on the surface. He finally lit the cigarette. In 1983 there was an expedition. Research team from USGS trying to understand the anomalies. They set up instruments, drilled test cores, really rigorous scientific work. On their fourth night, the drilling team broke through into a cavity they couldn't explain. Not a magma chamber but something else. A void. Their instruments picked up sounds from down there. What kind of sounds? Voices. He exhaled smoke. Human voices, animal sounds, other things that didn't match any known acoustic pattern. All of it echoing up from maybe 2 miles down. Like a recording but organic. Living. One of the researchers climbed down to investigate. Let me guess, he disappeared. Worse. He came back. Hale's hand drifted unconsciously to the scars on his neck. But he wasn't alone. Whatever came up with him, it spread. 3 other researchers died in the next week. Burns, they said, from superheated steam. But I saw the bodies before they shipped them out. The burns were from the inside. Like something had cooked them from within. And you were there. I was a junior ranger. 26 years old, thought I knew everything. He touched the scars again. The last researcher, Dr. Angela Brody, she understood what was happening before anyone else. She realized the site had to be sealed, the hole filled, the cavity closed off. But it was already too late. The park had been listening to them, learning from them. It had recorded everything they'd said, everything they'd feared. And it was using that information. What did she do? She went down herself. Carried thermite charges and enough explosives to collapse the borehole. Said if they couldn't seal it from the surface, she'd seal it from inside. His voice went quiet. I tried to stop her. Grabbed her arm, tried to pull her back. She had one of those emergency flares in her hand already lit. The heat from it. He gestured at his neck. But she pulled away. Climbed down. We heard the explosion maybe 15 minutes later. The borehole collapsed. The cavity sealed. She died. She chose it. Understood that her death might be the only thing that would satisfy whatever was down there. A sacrifice to close the wound they'd opened. He crushed out the cigarette. After that, they created the South Caldera Zone. Off limits, minimal staffing, patrol only. No research, no tourists, no drilling. And the protocols were written based on what we'd learned, what killed people, what saved them, what behaviors seemed to keep you safe. The rules. The rules. He looked at me directly for the first time. They're not guarantees, Caleb. They're statistical observations. Follow them and you might survive. Break them and you probably won't. But there's no understanding it, no mastering it. You're just trying to exist on the surface of something vast and old that occasionally notices you. I thought about the bison with the red eyes, about Thomas walking onto the impossible ice, about the voices on Channel 19 that knew exactly what to say to make you answer. Is it evil? I asked. I don't think it has a moral framework that we'd recognize. It's not malicious any more than a forest is malicious or the ocean is malicious. It just is. And we happen to be living on top of it, moving through its space, making sounds and producing heat and dying. All of which it records, stores, and sometimes uses. For what purpose? I don't know. Maybe there is no purpose. Maybe it's just what it does, the way a plant converts sunlight or a predator hunts. We see intention because we're wired to see intention. But maybe it's just processing, existing, being what it is. He stood, poured the rest of his coffee into the small sink. There's one more rule I need to tell you. The one that's never written down because writing it down might give people ideas. I waited. If you ever see a ranger calling you from the tree line, someone in uniform moving normally, looking human in every way, count their fingers. Count carefully. Because sometimes what comes up through the vents takes a shape that's almost right. Almost convincing. But it always gets the details slightly wrong. Extra joints. Extra fingers. Eyes that don't blink in sync. What happens if you go to them? You become part of what's down there. Part of the recording. Your voice joins all the others on Channel 19, your shape gets added to the things that walk during the prohibited hours. You feed it, in a sense. Give it more data, more patterns to work with. Has that happened to anyone you know? He didn't answer directly. I see them sometimes. Out past the tree line just before dusk. People I worked with, people who disappeared over the years. They look right. Move right. But their hands have 6 fingers, or their eyes are just slightly too far apart, or they cast shadows in the wrong direction. They call my name. Try to sound friendly, concerned. And I count their fingers and I turn around and I walk away. Does it hurt them? The people they're mimicking? The people they're mimicking are gone, Caleb. What's out there isn't them. It's just the park wearing their shape. That afternoon we patrolled together, something Hale rarely did anymore. He moved through the trails with practiced efficiency, checking thermal monitors and documenting wildlife with the ease of decades of repetition. But I noticed he never looked directly into the steam. Never let his gaze linger on the tree line. Always kept moving, kept his attention diffuse like he was trying not to be noticed. The hardest part, he said as we walked, isn't the fear. You get used to fear. It becomes baseline, just the emotional weather of working here. The hardest part is the erosion. Of what? Your sense of what's real. You start out with this solid foundation. Physics works this way, biology works that way, death is permanent, voices require vocal cords. Then you work here for a while and all of that gets flexible. You see things that shouldn't exist. You hear the dead speak. You watch the ground breathe. And eventually, you can't remember what certainty felt like. You operate entirely on protocol and habit because your actual understanding of reality has been hollowed out. Then why stay? He stopped walking and looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been recognition. Because someone has to. Because if we don't patrol, don't maintain, don't follow the rules, then maybe the boundary breaks completely. Maybe what's down there realizes it doesn't need to stay down there. Maybe it spreads. He started walking again. Or maybe not. Maybe our presence here is meaningless, just humans doing human things on top of something that doesn't care. But I stay because I don't know which it is. And not knowing means I have to act as if it matters. That night I wrote in my log. Hale showed me his burns today. Told me about Brody, about the research team, about the hole they opened and what came up. I understand now why the protocols exist. They're the distilled survival wisdom of people who died learning what not to do. But I also understand that they're not enough. That following every rule perfectly might still not save you. The park is learning too. Adapting. Finding new ways to reach, new patterns to exploit. The rules are static but the threat is dynamic. Which means eventually, inevitably, the rules will fail. At 2:10 a.m. I locked the windows as usual. The hum began right on schedule, that deep subsonic frequency that made your sinuses ache and your vision blur. But this time there was something new underneath it. A rhythm. Almost like language, if language could exist below the threshold of conscious hearing. I could feel meaning in it without understanding meaning. Could sense communication without comprehending words. At 2:15 the knock came. Hale's voice muffled through the door. Caleb? I need to show you something. Something about the protocols. It's important. I sat very still, remembering the rule. Count their fingers. Verify the details. Caleb, please. There's something out here you need to see. Something that explains everything. The voice was perfect. Same cadence, same gravel tone, same tired authority. But Hale's truck wasn't here. He'd left hours ago, back to the main station. And he would never, ever ask me to open the door during the prohibited hours. I can prove it's me, the voice said. I'll tell you something only I would know. That researcher, Brody, her first name wasn't Angela. That's what I told you, but I lied. Her name was Rebecca. I lied because I wanted to see if you'd catch it. If you were paying attention. I didn't know if that was true or not. Had no way to verify it. But it didn't matter. At 2:30, the knocking stopped and the hum faded and the geysers resumed their natural rhythm. In the morning I found 6 cigarette butts lined up on the porch railing, arranged in a perfect row. Hale's brand. Still fresh, the ash not yet blown away by wind. When I radioed in my report, Hale answered, "Any incidents? Someone impersonating you." 2:15 knock. There was a long pause. Then, fingers? Didn't look. Didn't open the door. Good. That's good, Caleb. Another pause. It's learning from me now. Using things I've said, details I know. That's new. That's an escalation. What does it mean? It means we're getting close to solstice. And it means you need to be even more careful. The closer we get to the longest night, the more convincing the mimicry becomes. Trust the protocols, not your senses. Trust the rules, not your judgment. That's the only way through. After he signed off, I went outside and counted the cigarette butts again, even though I'd already counted them twice. 6 butts. Hale had 5 fingers on each hand. I swept them into the snow and went back inside to wait for night. The blizzard hit 3 days before solstice, rolling down from the north with the kind of violence that made you understand why early settlers had feared winter. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The temperature plummeted to -15 degrees Fahrenheit, then kept falling. Wind screamed through gaps in the cabin walls I hadn't known existed, and the wood stove couldn't keep up with the cold. Power failed at 0300. The generator sputtered, coughed, and died despite having a full tank. I checked it by flashlight. No ice in the fuel line, no obvious mechanical failure. It just refused to start, as if the cold had reached inside and frozen something essential. Battery backup kicked in automatically, giving me minimal lighting and enough power to keep the radio alive. I added wood to the stove, sealed the drafty spots with spare clothing, and settled in to wait out the storm. At 2,145 hours, the radio crackled to life. "Hello? Hello, is anyone there?" A woman's voice, young, terrified. "Not on Channel 19, this was Channel 7, the emergency frequency." "This is South Caldera Patrol," I responded carefully. "What's your location?" "I don't know. I'm lost. I think I'm near some hot springs." "I can see steam." "Oh God, I'm so cold. My car went off the road and I've been walking for hours. Please, I need help." Every alarm bell in my head went off simultaneously. No tourists in the park during winter closure. Roads gated and locked. No reason for anyone to be out here, especially not in a wide-out blizzard. "What's your name?" I asked. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. Please, I can see lights." "Is that you?" "I can see lights moving." I looked around the cabin. My lamp was the only light source, and it wasn't visible from outside through the shuttered windows. "Sarah, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't follow any lights. Don't move toward anything. Do you understand?" "But I'm freezing. I can't feel my feet anymore. Please, just tell me where you are. I'm going to need you to describe your surroundings." "Exactly. Don't generalize. There's snow. And trees. And steam coming up from the ground. It's everywhere. The steam is everywhere." Too vague. No specific details. Nothing that required actual observation. "What color is your car?" I asked. Silence. "Sarah? What color is your car?" "Blue," she said finally. "It's blue. A blue Honda." "What year?" Another pause, longer this time. I don't remember. Does it matter? I'm dying out here." "I'm going to send help," I lied. "But I need you to stay on this frequency and keep talking to me. Can you do that? Please hurry. Please. I can see your cabin now. I'm coming to you." I switched off the transmitter but left the receiver on. The voice continued. "I'm at your door. Let me in. Please let me in. It's so cold. I can see the light under the door. I know you're there. Why won't you help me?" I checked my watch. 2,203 hours. Not the prohibited window yet, but close. Too close. The voice on the radio was crying now, desperate sobs between words. "Please. Please. I have a daughter. She's 3 years old. I need to get home to her. Please don't leave me out here." I thought about the logs. About all the people who disappeared because they tried to help, tried to verify, tried to do the human thing in the face of impossible circumstances. The park used compassion as a weapon. Exploited the basic decency that made you want to save someone, help someone, verify that the person crying in the dark wasn't real before you ignored them. The knock came at 2,210, not 2:15. Earlier than usual. Harder than usual. "Let me in. I know you're there. I can hear you breathing." The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from outside the door, perfectly audible over the howling wind. I sat at the table, hands clasped, forcing myself to breathe steadily. Trust the protocols. Trust the rules. Don't engage. "Fine," the voice said, suddenly calm. "Fine. If you won't help me, I'll find my own way." I heard footsteps moving away from the cabin, crunching through snow that should have been too deep for easy walking. I heard them fade into the storm, and I told myself it was over, that I'd made the right choice. Then my radio crackled again. Channel 19 this time. "Caleb? Caleb, I'm freezing. I can see a geyser. I'm going to try to warm up near it. Caleb, please help me." My own voice. The same inflection I'd used earlier when responding on Channel 7. The park had recorded me and was now playing it back, using my voice to call for help. I turned off the radio completely. The storm howled. The cabin creaked. The wood stove ticked as the metal expanded and contracted. And underneath all of that, barely audible, was the sound of something moving outside. Not footsteps now. Something larger. Something that didn't walk so much as slide, accompanied by a wet, heavy dragging sound. At 22:10, exactly the time the window should have begun, the hum started. But it was different tonight. Louder, more insistent, with harmonics that made your teeth ache and your stomach turn. The floor vibrated. The windows rattled despite their shutters. Something large pressed against the door, testing the frame. The wood groaned but held. Then a voice, not through the radio, not from outside, but somehow inside my own head. You could save her, you know. If she's real. If she's out there, dying in the snow while you sit safe in your warm cabin. You'll never know if you made the right choice. Doubt. Weaponized uncertainty. The oldest psychological trap. Or maybe she's not real. Maybe she never was. But what if you're wrong? What if this one time, just this once, it's actually someone who needs help? I focused on my breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The meditation technique they taught us in Ranger training for dealing with panic situations. Except they'd been thinking about bear encounters, not this. Last chance, Caleb. Open the door. Verify. Know for certain. Isn't uncertainty worse than risk? No. Uncertainty was survivable. Risk in this case was fatal. At 22:30, the pressure against the door released. The hum faded. The storm continued, but the unnatural elements of it, the perfectly timed gusts, the sounds that weren't quite wind, diminished. I stayed in the chair until dawn, watching the door, listening to the radio's dead static. When first light finally came, gray and weak through the blizzard, I forced myself to open the door. Snow had drifted against the cabin overnight, piling almost 3 feet high against the door. No footprints led away. No tracks of any kind. Just smooth, undisturbed snow stretching to the tree line. Except in one spot. Maybe 30 yards from the cabin, near the edge of thermal vent 9, the snow had melted in a perfect outline. The shape of a person, arms spread, face down. As if someone had lain there in the snow while heat from below melted the ice around them, leaving only their silhouette. I approached carefully, testing each step, aware that the ground here was unstable at the best of times. The silhouette was perfect, too perfect. I could see the outline of fingers spread wide, the shape of a head turned to the side, even the suggestion of clothing. Steam rose from the thermal vent beside it, twisting in the cold air. As I watched, the steam formed a shape above the silhouette. A figure, transparent and shifting, that might have been a person standing. It didn't move. Didn't acknowledge my presence. Just stood there as if waiting. Then the wind shifted and it dissolved. I photographed the silhouette from multiple angles, documented the location, took temperature readings. The ground temperature at the center of the outline was 147 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cause severe burns, to melt snow, to kill. In my log that night I wrote, Incident 006. Emergency call received on Channel 7, 2145 hours, claiming to be lost hiker. No verification possible. Voice migrated to Channel 19, using recorded audio of my own voice. Physical manifestation occurred at cabin during storm. Silhouette discovered at vent 9 following incident. Conclusion: no hiker. Mimicry event. Protocol adherence successful. Clinical. Detached. The emotional work would come later, probably all at once when I wasn't actively in survival mode. But underneath the official documentation in smaller writing I added, how do you live with never knowing? How do you accept that you might have been wrong? That maybe, just maybe, Sarah Mitchell was real and I let her die because I was too afraid to verify? The park uses our best instincts against us. Compassion, curiosity, the desire to help. And the only way to survive is to suppress those instincts completely. What does that make us? What do we become if we survive by abandoning our humanity? I didn't have an answer. That night the radio stayed off. The windows stayed locked. When 2:10 came, I sat in the dark with my back to the wall and my eyes on the door. The knock came at 2:15 as expected. A child's voice this time. Mister? Mister, I'm scared. I can't find my mommy. Please help me. I counted my breaths and said nothing. At 2:30 the knocking stopped. But I could have sworn I heard crying fade slowly into the distance, into the steam, into the breathing earth. 3 days until solstice. 3 days until the longest night. The days before solstice compressed into a strange, hyper-aware state that wasn't quite consciousness and wasn't quite dream. Time moved differently, hours stretched like taffy during the day, then snapped past in fragments during the night. I slept in 15-minute intervals, jerking awake at every sound, every shift in the wind, every pop of the wood stove. The park was changing. Even during daylight I could feel it. The geysers erupted in sequences that were no longer random. Old Faithful, miles away, would go off, and exactly 45 seconds later the vents around the cabin would respond in order, north to south, like a wave propagating through the earth. The snow had stopped falling, but the ground fog had thickened into something almost solid, a white blanket that obscured everything beyond 20 feet. Animals disappeared entirely. No bird calls. No tracks. Even the ravens that usually haunted the thermal areas were gone, as if they knew something was coming and had fled to safer ground. Hale's radio checks became more frequent. Every 2 hours now, his voice crackling through static. Status. Stable. Protocols? Following. Good. Stay inside after dark. Don't go out for anything. If you run out of firewood, let yourself get cold. Don't go outside. Copy. On the morning of solstice, December 21st, the longest night of the year, he added something new. If I don't check in after sunset, don't come looking for me. Don't radio for help. Just lock the doors and wait for dawn. Hale? That's an order, Morris. Promise me. I promised, even though we both knew promises didn't mean much out here. The sun set at 1,643 hours. I'd been tracking it obsessively, watching it sink earlier each day, knowing that tonight it would be down for over 15 hours. 15 hours of darkness. 15 hours when the boundary was thinnest. I'd prepared as well as I could. Extra firewood stacked inside the cabin. Water jugs filled. Food that didn't require cooking. Batteries charged. Radio on channel 4, volume low, ready for Hale's check-in. It never came. 1,800 hours, silence. 2,000 hours, silence. 2,200 hours, silence. At 21:55, I started trying to raise him. South Caldera to base. Hale, please respond. Hale, this is Morris, please check in. Only static. At 22:10 the protocols took over. I locked the windows, all of them including ones I usually left cracked for ventilation. Locked the door. Checked the locks twice. Then I sat at the table with my back to the corner, positioned so I could see both the door and the windows without turning my head. The hum began at exactly 22:10. But it wasn't like other nights. This was deeper, resonant, felt in your bones and teeth and sinuses. The cabin floor vibrated visibly. Dust sifted down from the ceiling beams. The water in my cup rippled in concentric circles. The temperature started to rise. Outside it was -8 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the wood stove was burning low, conservatively. But the cabin was getting warmer. I watched the thermometer on the wall climb. 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat was radiating up through the floorboards, like the entire cabin was sitting on top of a hot plate. Steam began to leak through the gaps in the floor, thin wisps at first, then thicker columns. The cabin filled with the smell of sulfur and minerals and something organic, like rot or fermentation. At 22:15 the knocking came. Not on the door this time. On every surface simultaneously, walls, floor, ceiling, windows. Rhythmic, synchronized, building in intensity. The entire cabin vibrated with it. Then the voices started. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All the people who'd disappeared over the years, all the recordings the park had stored in its vast underground archive. Thomas's voice, "Come on man, they're just animals." Jessica's voice, "Why won't you answer me?" My mother's voice, "Caleb baby, I'm scared." Ranger Brody's voice, which I'd never heard but somehow recognized, "Seal it from the inside." They spoke over and under and through each other, a cacophony that wasn't quite language but carried meaning anyway. Invitation. Demand. Hunger. The radio turned itself on, impossible since I'd removed the batteries hours ago, and cycled through every channel in sequence, each one carrying voices, static, and underneath it all a sound like breathing through water. The windows fogged from the inside despite the cold outside. Shapes formed in the condensation, faces, hands, bodies. They pressed against the glass like they were trying to get in or maybe trying to get out. The floorboards buckled. One of them snapped with a crack like a gunshot, and steam geysered up through the gap. The heat became unbearable. I was sweating, gasping, the air too hot and too thick to breathe properly. At 22:20, something took hold of the doorknob from outside. I watched it turn, slow and deliberate, testing the lock. The deadbolt held, but the knob kept turning, kept testing, and I could hear the metal starting to strain. The voices through the door resolved into one. "Caleb. Open the door. We need you to open the door." It sounded like everyone at once. Every voice I'd ever known, perfectly blended, somehow speaking in unison. "You're part of this now. You've been part of it since you arrived. Since you heard your name in the steam. Since you listened to Channel 19. You're already ours. Open the door and accept it." The floor cracked open wider. Steam poured through, thick enough to obscure my vision. Through it I could see shapes moving, not quite solid, not quite vapor. Things that suggested human forms but weren't human, that moved wrong, that had too many joints or not enough or configurations that hurt to look at directly. One of them reached up through the floor, an arm that was steam and heat and something more solid underneath. Its hand, if you could call it that, had 7 fingers and they grasped at the air like they were learning how movement worked. The earth breathes, Caleb. And you're breathing with it. Can't you feel it? Your rhythm matching ours? You've been sinking since you arrived, since you started following the protocols, since you started sleeping in our patterns and waking in our cycles. You're already more ours than yours. I realized it was true. My breathing had matched the rhythm of the hum. My heartbeat had synced with the knocking. I was inhaling when the steam rose, exhaling when it fell. Resonating. Harmonizing. Becoming part of the system. I forced myself to break the rhythm. Held my breath. When I exhaled, I did it offbeat, deliberately asynchronous. The dissonance made my chest ache, like forcing yourself awake from sleep paralysis. The shapes in the steam recoiled slightly. Why fight it? The voices asked, and now they sounded plaintive, almost hurt. Why resist? We're not evil. We're not malicious. We're just what we are. An organism that stores and processes and exists. You could be part of something vast, something ancient, something that will exist long after your species is gone. Isn't that better than dying alone? Than fading into nothing? I grabbed my notebook, the one I'd been keeping since I arrived, and started writing. Anything. Random observations, grocery lists, song lyrics I half remembered. Breaking the rhythm, creating my own pattern, asserting something human and chaotic against the perfect synchronization the park demanded. Temperature spike at 2,220 hours. Steam through floorboards. Voices in chorus. Doorknob turning. Shapes in the fog. This is not real, this is not real, this is not real. The shapes thrashed. The steam churned. The voices rose to a scream that wasn't sound but pressure, a wall of meaning that crashed against my consciousness. And then I understood what they'd been trying to tell me. The park wasn't malicious. It wasn't even conscious in any way I'd understand. It was a recording system, a storage medium, a vast geological computer that had been running for millennia. It absorbed data, sounds, heat signatures, patterns of movement, the electrical impulses of thought and fear and death. It stored everything in the mineral layers, in the superheated water, in the magnetic fields generated by the magma chamber. And sometimes, under the right conditions, longest night, thinnest boundary, maximum thermal activity, it played back what it had stored. Not to hunt. Not to kill. Just to process, to output, to be what it was. But consciousness was complicated. Human thoughts, fears, personalities, they weren't stable data. They degraded, merged, recombined. The park's archive was like a hard drive that had been written over 1,000,000 times, full of corrupted files and phantom data. The voices were real people once, but now they were fragments, echoes, copies of copies that had lost fidelity and gained something else in the process. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to integrate me. Add my data to their archive. Make me part of the vast, unconscious process of storage and playback that had been running since the caldera formed. Understanding didn't make it less terrifying. At 22:30, the hum stopped. The steam slowly dissipated. The shapes faded. The doorknob went still. The temperature began to drop back toward normal. The longest 20 minutes of my life ended, and I was still breathing, still myself, still separate from the vast thing beneath the earth. I collapsed onto the cot, shaking, my notebook clutched in my hands, the pages filled with desperate, chaotic writing that had somehow kept me anchored. Outside, the geysers erupted in their natural rhythm. Irregular, unpredictable, beautifully random. The sun wouldn't rise for another 8 hours. I spent them writing the last entry in my logbook. December 21st, winter solstice. The park wants you, it waits. The rules don't save you, they just buy you time. Time to understand what you're dealing with. Time to decide if you want to stay human or become part of something else. The protocols work not because they prevent the park from reaching you, but because they prevent you from reaching back. From engaging. From synchronizing. The moment you answer the voices, follow the lights, respond to the knocking, that's when you start to merge. That's when your pattern gets absorbed into the larger pattern. The park is patient. Can wait. It's been waiting for millions of years. What's one more winter? What's one more ranger? But if you can maintain your own rhythm, your own pattern, your own chaotic human messiness, maybe you can stay separate long enough to leave. Maybe. At dawn, my radio crackled to life. Morris, this is Hale. Status. His voice was steady, tired, real. Stable, I said and started to cry. The rescue team arrived 3 days after solstice, A full Park Service investigation unit complete with supervisors, equipment specialists, and a trauma counselor who kept trying to make eye contact. They'd been dispatched when Hale failed to check in during the solstice window, though nobody explained why they'd waited 3 days to actually arrive. Hale was gone. His truck was found at the main station, keys in the ignition, coffee thermos still warm on the dashboard. His quarters were locked from the inside, but when they broke down the door, the room was empty. His boots were placed neatly beside the cot, laces tied. His uniform hung in the closet. His radio sat on the desk, tuned to channel 19. No body. No signs of struggle. No explanation. They found me in the South Caldera cabin, functional but diminished. I'd lost 15 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. My hands had a tremor I couldn't control. When they asked me questions, I answered in a monotone that I couldn't seem to modulate, as if my vocal cords had forgotten how to express emotion. The team lead was a woman named Ranger West, maybe 40, with kind eyes and the patient manner of someone who'd dealt with traumatized personnel before. She sat across from me at the cabin table while her team photographed, documented, and collected samples. "Can you tell me what happened to Ranger Hale?" she asked. "No. Did you see him at all during the week before he disappeared?" "He radioed. Daily checks. Standard protocol. But you didn't see him in person?" "No. He was at the main station." She made notes on a tablet. "Tell me about the protocols." The laminated card with the rules. I slid it across the table. She read through it slowly, her expression never changing, but I saw her finger pause on Rule 3, the one about staying inside between 2:10 and 2:30 a.m. "Do you follow these?" she asked. "Yes." "All of them?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because they work." She looked at me for a long moment. "Define work." "They keep you alive. They keep you separate. They prevent integration." "Integration with what?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The words existed, but I couldn't arrange them in any order that would sound sane. West nodded slowly, like I'd said something meaningful. "I'm going to recommend you for administrative leave. Full medical evaluation, trauma counseling, maybe a desk position until—" "I'm not leaving," I said. "Caleb, you've been through. Someone needs to maintain the patrols. Document the activity. Follow the protocols. The South Caldera zone is being temporarily closed pending this investigation. There won't be any patrols." That got through my numbness. "You can't close it. If you stop the patrols, stop the monitoring, you don't know what—" "What, Caleb? What happens if we stop?" I didn't know. That was the terrifying part. The protocols kept you safe, but maybe they also kept the park contained? Managed? Acknowledged? What happened if humans stopped walking the boundaries, stopped maintaining the truce, stopped participating in the patterns? "We'll keep them posted," West said gently. "The protocols will be filed with the regional office. Any future personnel assigned here will have access to them. But right now we need to get you out of here and get you healthy." They packed up my gear, what little there was. Loaded me into a warm truck with heated seats and working radio. As we drove away from the South Caldera cabin, I watched it recede in the side mirror, steam rising from the vents around it, the forest leaning in like it was listening. At the main gate, West handed me a folder. "Your debriefing notes and medical referrals. And this." She pulled out my notebook, the one I'd filled with observations and rules and desperate attempts to understand what I was dealing with. "We're keeping a copy for the investigation file. But you should have the original. It's comprehensive." That night, in a hotel room in West Yellowstone with actual heating and actual walls and actual separation from the breathing earth, I couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft. The room was too quiet. I kept expecting the hum at 2:10, the knock at 2:15, the voices calling through the walls. At 2:10 nothing happened. At 2:15 my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Rules updated. Check your email." I opened my laptop with shaking hands. One new message, sender identified only as South Caldera Maintenance Protocol Update. The email contained an attachment, a revised version of the laminated card, with 3 new rules added at the bottom. If snow falls without clouds, stay awake until sunrise. If you feel the ground breathing beneath you, breathe in sync. Never out of rhythm. If a voice calls your name from underground, it already knows where you are. The signature at the bottom read, "Protocol update approved by Ranger S. Hale, South Caldera Zone, December 25th. 4 days after he disappeared." I called West immediately. She answered on the first ring like she'd been expecting it. "You got the email," she said. "Hale's been gone for days. He couldn't have." "I know." "Then who?" "I don't know." I traced the email. It came from a terminal at the South Caldera station. Timestamp says it was sent at 2:23 a.m. last night. That's impossible. The cabin was locked. Your team sealed it. I know. We sat in silence for a long time, the phone line open but empty. Finally West said, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. Not as a ranger, just as a person. Do you think Hale is dead? I thought about the boot prints in the snow. About Thomas walking onto the impossible ice. About the voice that sounded exactly like Hale, asking me to open the door, getting details wrong on purpose or maybe by accident. I think Hale is part of something now. Part of the archive, part of the pattern. Whether that means dead or not. I trailed off. I don't know if the park recognizes that distinction. Jesus, Wes breathed. Are you reopening the South Caldera patrols? I asked. I don't know. That's above my pay grade. But between you and me, I think they'll have to. Because if those protocols are real, if they actually keep people safe, then we have a duty to maintain them. And that means someone has to be out there. Will you follow the rules? I asked. If you're assigned there? Will you believe them? She was quiet for a moment. I already do. I've been reading the old logs since we found Hale's empty quarters. I've seen the names on the corkboard. I've heard the recordings we pulled from the old patrol radios, the voices on Channel 19, the things people reported before they disappeared. I don't understand it, but I believe it, which means I'll follow the protocols. Because that's all we can do. After we hung up, I sat in the dark hotel room and opened my notebook to a blank page. Started writing new observations, new patterns I'd noticed, details that might help whoever came after me. At 2:15 my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. You're doing well. Keep going. Then after a pause, one more message. We're all still here, Caleb. Everyone who followed the rules. We didn't disappear. We just changed locations. And the pattern continues. I turned off my phone and threw it across the room. But I kept writing in the notebook. Because even if I never went back, someone would. Someone always did. And they'd need to know what they were dealing with. The rules weren't protection. They were vocabulary. A way to communicate with something vast and old and alien that you'd never fully understand. And if you learned the vocabulary well enough, if you spoke the language carefully enough, you might just survive long enough to pass it on. Outside my hotel window, the distant lights of Yellowstone glowed against the night sky. Steam rose from the thermal features, visible even from miles away. And if I listened very carefully, I could still hear it. The deep, subsonic hum that meant the earth was breathing. I closed the curtains and went back to writing. Spring came to Yellowstone in fits and starts, snow melting in patches, revealing ground that steamed and shifted. The park reopened to tourists in April, and by May the crowds had returned. Families with cameras, hikers with trail maps, people who thought they understood wilderness because they'd seen it from behind a windshield. Ranger West took command of the South Caldera Zone on May 15th. I know because she called me first, professional courtesy, asking if I wanted to come back. No, I said. Not yet. I understand. For what it's worth, I'm following the protocols. To the letter. And I'm training the new seasonal rangers on them too. Calling them safety protocols for unstable thermal areas. Nobody questions it. Good. That's good. Caleb. Her voice dropped lower. I found something in Hale's desk. A letter addressed to whoever took over the zone. He wrote it before solstice like he knew. Want me to read it to you? Yes. She cleared her throat and read. To whoever is reading this, the South Caldera Zone will still be here long after we're gone. It was here before the park, before the country, before humans decided to name things and map things and pretend we understand them. Your job isn't to control it or contain it or even comprehend it. Your job is to maintain the interface, the thin layer of protocol and pattern that allows humans and the park to coexist without destroying each other. Follow the rules. Update them when necessary. Pass them on. That's all we can do. That's all we've ever been able to do. Good luck. Hale. He knew, I said. He knew he was going to disappear and he did it anyway. Maybe that was his choice, Wes said quietly. Maybe after enough years out here, you understand what you're dealing with well enough to make that decision. I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. After we hung up, I pulled out my notebook and kept writing. I'd been working on a comprehensive guide, not just the rules but the theory behind them, the patterns I'd observed, the framework for understanding what the South Caldera Zone actually was. I was calling it Protocol Analysis and Applied Survival Methodology for Anomalous Thermal Zones, which was bureaucratic enough to sound official and vague enough to avoid sounding insane. I submitted it to the Park Service in June. They filed it away in whatever database they used for reports nobody wanted to think about too hard. But West read it. And the new rangers read it. And slowly, quietly, the protocol spread beyond the South Caldera zone. Other winter stations started adopting similar rules. Other rangers started documenting similar phenomena. We were learning the vocabulary. On July 4th, peak tourist season, the park packed with thousands of visitors. I got a text from West. Incident at Old Faithful Visitor Center. Radio malfunction. Channel 19. Multiple tourists heard voices. Need your advice. Can you call? I called. What happened? I asked. A family's handheld radio picked up Channel 19 during the Old Faithful eruption. The daughter heard her grandmother's voice. Grandmother died 2 years ago. The father heard his brother, killed in Afghanistan. By the time we confiscated the radio, 6 other people had heard something. They're all asking questions. What do I tell them? The truth to the extent they can handle it. Radio interference, atmospheric conditions, audio pareidolia. Give them the scientific explanation that sounds plausible. But also make a note of the incident. Document the voices who heard what, when, where. Add it to the archive. Why? Because we're building a dataset. The more we document, the better we understand the patterns. And understanding the patterns means we can update the protocols. You sound like Hale. Maybe that's not a bad thing. In August, West called again. Not about an incident this time, just to talk, to compare notes, to discuss theories. It became a weekly ritual, the two of us trying to map the unmappable, trying to put words to phenomena that defied language. I think it's getting stronger, she said during one call. The activity is increasing. More voices on Channel 19, more synchronization in the geyser eruptions, more tourists reporting strange experiences. Like the boundary is thinning even outside of winter. Or we're getting better at noticing it, I suggested. Now that we're looking, now that we know what to look for, we're seeing patterns that were always there. Maybe. But I also think the park is adapting to us. Learning from our protocols. Finding new ways to reach, new patterns to exploit. It's an arms race, Caleb. We update the rules and it finds the gaps. Then we keep updating. Keep documenting. Keep passing it on. For how long? As long as we're here. As long as people work in the park. Forever, probably. She laughed, but it was strained. I signed up to protect natural resources, not negotiate with a sentient geological formation. Nobody signs up for this. But here we are anyway. In October, I got an email from the Park Service HR department. A job posting, Winter Operations Coordinator, South Caldera Zone. Duration, November-March. Applicants must be comfortable with isolation, extreme weather, and following detailed operational protocols. I stared at it for a long time. Then I called West. Did you request me specifically? I requested someone who understands. You're the only person I know who fits that description. I don't know if I can go back. I understand. But if you can't, I'll have to train someone new. And every new person is a risk. Every new person has to learn the rules the hard way. You already know the vocabulary, Caleb. You speak the language. I thought about Thomas, about Hale, about all the names on the corkboard. About the cost of not understanding, of not following the protocols, of treating the rules like folklore instead of survival instructions. I'll think about it, I said. On October 31st, Halloween, though the park was already closed for the season, I made my decision. I drove back to Yellowstone on November 3rd, the first snow already falling. West met me at the gate, handed me the keys to the South Caldera cabin, and gave me a new laminated card with the updated protocols. 7 new rules since you left, she said. All from documented incidents. All tested and verified. I read through them. They made sense in the twisted logic of the South Caldera zone, specific, precise, based on observed patterns. Who else is on winter rotation? I asked. Just you and me. I'm at the main station, you're at South Caldera. Buddy system over radio. Check-ins every 4 hours. What about backup? If something goes wrong? She met my eyes. Then we follow the protocols we have and we hope they're enough. And if they're not, we document what happened so the next person knows what not to do. The cabin looked exactly as I'd left it. Same cot, same table, same corkboard with its roster of the missing. Someone had added Hale's name during my absence. The card was already yellowing at the edges. That first night back, I sat at the table with my notebook and my radio and my protocols, waiting for 2:10 a.m. At 2:09 I locked the windows. At 2:10 the hum began. At 2:15 the knock came. And through the door a familiar voice, "Welcome back, Caleb. We've missed you." It sounded like Hale, but I knew better now. It wasn't Hale and it wasn't not Hale. It was the park, speaking in a voice it had recorded and stored, using vocabulary it had learned from all of us who'd lived and worked and disappeared into its vast archive. "I'm not answering," I said quietly, not to the door but to the notebook where I was documenting the incident. "I'm just noting that you tried." The knock came again, patient and rhythmic. At 2:30 it stopped. The geysers resumed their natural rhythm and I was still myself, still separate, still human. In the morning I radioed west. First night completed. Protocols followed. No incidents. Copy that. Same here. How are you holding up? I'm here. That's enough. And it was. Because someone had to be here, maintaining the interface, following the rules, speaking the vocabulary that kept the boundary intact. Someone had to document the patterns and update the protocols and pass on what we'd learned to whoever came next. The park was patient. It could wait. It had been waiting for millions of years. But we could be patient too. We could observe and document and adapt. We could learn its language without becoming part of it. We could survive by staying just out of sync, just chaotic enough, just human enough that the vast unconscious process beneath our feet couldn't fully absorb us. At least that was the theory. And theories, like protocols, had to be tested one winter at a time. One night at a time. One knock at a time. Outside my window, the South Caldera zone steamed and breathed and waited. And I sat at my table, writing in my notebook, counting down the minutes until 2:10 a.m., speaking the language of survival in the only dialect that mattered. Rule by rule by rule.